By the way, if the little kids like it, the big kids tend to, which are the rest of you. Okay? I know in the evenings I'm running pretty heavy just on Bible teachings. And so in worship service, what I tend to do is I tell you the what in the prophecy sections, and in worship service I want to focus more on the how to live those things, which is usually stories. And there's this guy I'm a believer in, his name is Jesus, and he told stories. And so I use that aspect as well. Today is entitled, What Was I Thinking? Have you heard or are aware there's a mental health crisis in our world? Our country has a major mental health crisis, and it's rapidly getting worse. As people have been ignoring the Bible, the health crisis has been getting worse. Do you think maybe there's a connection? I'm pretty sure there is. The Lord somehow prepared me and put me on a path of working with turnaround churches, which means He puts me in churches that are in big trouble. Not always a lot of fun, but it is a joy to watch things turn around. Early in my ministry, I was sent to a church. Well, there were actually two churches that I was pastoring, and I'd be bouncing back and forth between them. But that district of two churches, the previous 5 pastors had all left the ministry from those churches. The last one had retired. The rest left for other reasons. And the churches were in trouble. I was there for about 3 years, and by the time we left, God had blessed, and in the combined churches, we had a higher attendance than we had members on a weekly basis. And, the membership was climbing, and people were happy. God had blessed. From there, I went to a church that was very divided, and they said of themselves they were such a cold church you could ice skate down the center aisle. That's what they told me about themselves when I was interviewing to be their pastor. Now, I knew that to be true, because as a young man, I'd been backpacking the Appalachian Trail. And I came down off the mountain at the end of my trip on a Friday night. My goal was to go to church on Sabbath, and I was going to catch my ride back home to Michigan on Sunday. So I hitchhiked into town, spent the night in a guy's house, and he brought me to church in the morning, dropped my partner and I off at the front yard of the church. We got out of his car, grabbed our expedition packs, and headed for the front door. And a deacon met us at the door. Not to invite us in, he met us at the door. He was a nice guy. He said, oh, are you guys hiking the Appalachian Trail? He'd met some hikers before. You have to understand. The cutoffs I was wearing, I had been wearing for 2 months. I washed them every once in a while. I hadn't had a haircut for months. Probably looked a little rough. My partner looked no better than I did. And he said, are you wanting to go get some groceries or whatever to go back out? You don't need to come to church. I'll take you and help you get groceries. He's very kind. Our goal was to get into church, and it seemed like his goal was to help us not get into the church. And we said, no, we don't need to go anywhere. And it took a while, but we finally got around him and into the church. My second time to the church is to interview to be their pastor. Years later. And It was the most hostile church interview I've ever had in my life. They weren't kidding about being a cold, cruel church. And I decided I didn't need the job, and I just went right back at them. And I ended up being asked to be the pastor. I told the conference administrators, the people who gave me the invitation to come, I said, you know, you've heard about honeymoon periods for the first year of a new pastor? I said it'll be more like a buzzsaw. I said, it's a dying church, and I'm accepting the invitation to lead in a revival, not officiate a funeral. Oh, it was brutal. And I told you about that church last week in the fire. And it went from 360 members to 330 members. And then the 580. God turned it around. Amazing things that God did for that. And then I was asked to go to another troubled church. This was a much larger one. It had 900 and some members. There were three groups. There was the country and western group, there was the traditional, and there was contemporary. And they were fighting it out over music. The only thing the three groups could agree on is they wanted me as their pastor. They all knew me. That's the only thing they could agree on. And I tried saying a couple of things that I knew would cause them to say no, and they said yes anyway. I figured, okay, then the Lord wants me to go. And I went there. By the time I got there, the country and western group had split off, which just a month or two later. That left the traditional and the contemporary group. The traditional group, especially telling the young people, do as you're told. The contemporary group, we will entertain you. Me, I had a different idea. I wanted to train and involve them in ministry. And you guys are going to figure it out anyway, but I'm talking about the Gentry Seventh-day Adventist Church. And I knew we had some differences going on. And there was good things on all sides. I was successful in not joining one side or the other. To give you an idea, that one of the leaders of the traditional group told me, now that you've been gone 2 years after I left there, could you tell me which side you were on? I said, could you not figure it out? I wasn't on a side. There's good and there's bad in all the groups. We need to figure out how they work together. I used young people and revived prayer meeting and other things led by young people, high school students at that school. Then came a September to remember. I will never forget that September. You see, there's this little road called Don Hill Road. On one side is a big church, an elementary school, and a youth center with a nice gym and everything in it. On the other side is an academy, a high school, Christian high school, boarding high school. And the kids came across the street to our church for Sabbath services and other special events. And we had a business meeting. And the traditional and the contemporary were at each other, and the academy was saying, we're with the contemporary group, either do it our way or we're going to separate and run our own worship service. The business meeting did not go well. You see, as a church leader, you're not a dictator. You can't make people do anything. You can lead them, but if they don't want to be led, it's not going anywhere. And there was these two groups, and they weren't budging. And the young people were getting caught in the crossfire. And that's what I hated. And it went so bad that for the next several days, this was my schedule. I told my secretary, I know I've got people calling. Anybody that's upset, I'm telling them to call you. Here's the calendar. I'm taking 8 one-hour appointments a day. And I've day after day, 8 hours a day, on the hour, I changed who was yelling at me. You try that for day after day. I listened. And on September 10, we had another meeting. It was student leaders, school faculty, and school leaders. We were together. And that one didn't work well either, and the academy said we're out. And the contemporary group were with the academy. The split was on. September 10. The next morning, by the way, I had told leadership in the conference what was going to happen, and they didn't believe me. And it was all happening. The next morning, my wife and I headed out our driveway and walked down the road. We're talking and praying. What does God want us to do next? I mean, God has worked with me to work with turnaround churches. He's done it over and over again. What does he want me to do this time? As we're coming back to our house, my teenage daughter comes out of the house to meet us. Mom, Dad, something terrible has happened. It's 9/11, the day after the split. What a combination. The 10th, my church crashes. The 11th, my country crashes. Yeah, was attacked. My church was attacked, the country's attacked. Yeah, okay, fair enough. I'll go with that one. And before the day was over, well, I went and spent, when the towers came down, I was with the high school students. From there, I went to Safe Television for a program called America Talks, and was with John Brown, a senator, and others. We were there as we talked to people and took calls. Our church was supposed to be doing a prophetic outreach soon after, like about a week later. And my church said, we can't do it. I said, what do you mean? While everybody's asking questions on what's going on in the world, you're going to say we're not going to do it? Yeah, we shouldn't do it. Every time I've ever been doing anything, when something like this happens, people are looking for answers. But my church was in such turmoil, when people are looking for answers, they didn't want to talk to anybody. I said, sorry, the brochures are already in the mail. We've got to. We had about 20 people out of a 900-member church show up. 2 guests. We were in such bad shape, God wouldn't even let people come. And I went into a depression. I'd thrown absolutely everything I knew how to do. I'd given it everything I had. I hit the wall and I failed. And I found myself at home, sitting out by my pond with a notebook, journaling. Because I'm just trying to find out what's going on inside of me, and I'm writing. And I hate writing, and I'm in such bad shape, that's all I can do. And I can remember my wife and my kids looking at me like, what now? What's going on? I knew the signs of depression. I've watched lots of people go through it. And I knew I was spinning out fast and hard. And I made a phone call to the guy in charge of the psychology department or whatever at John Brown University. He was often on America Talks with me. I know the guy. He wasn't there. That figures. I left a voicemail. I told him, I know the signs of depression, and I'm spinning out fast, and I'm spinning out hard, and it would probably be better to talk sooner than later. And I hung up. That night at about 7:30, 8 o'clock, I get a phone call. Said, hey, I just came in my office and heard a message. Where are you? I said, I'm sitting at home. I can't do anything else. He said, how long would it take you to get here? I said, 15 minutes. He said, I'm waiting. Come. I went there, and I ended up going to him 3 times to talk about this. Once or twice, my wife came with me. But she wasn't there, I know, the first time. And he asked me a question that I will never, ever forget. What are you trying to do that only God can do? Oh, I knew instantly. I'm trying to save a church, but it's not my church, is it? It's God's church. I'm trying to do God's job. Oh yeah, he worked with me, one church after another, turn them around and have higher attendance than there was membership. But I got a feeling that he needed to let me know it wasn't me, it was him doing it. And he let me crash hard. I said, okay, God, it's all yours. I mean, I'm going to do the things I have to do, but this is all your problem. It's your church. I can't fix it. I'm not going to run away from it, but you fix it. And I let go. Instantly, I was feeling better inside. Not good, but better. Okay? And shortly afterwards, we're now in October, and the Academy has said that on the weekend of October 20-something, they were going to start their services. So we had little over a month that we were still together. And I've given it all to God. Middle of the night, I get a phone call. The Academy's on fire. Oh, I've heard these calls before. And I got dressed and I got in my car and I headed over. And I parked down below the hill and I walked up the hill, and as my face broke the level of the hill, I could feel the heat hit me from across campus. The Academy cafeteria was being demolished in a fire. And there were people walking around from the traditional group and the contemporary group and students and faculty and all the rest of it. And I'm walking around mingling with them. And I walked up to the Academy principal. He's got 2 dorms, boys and girls dorm, students on campus. And I'm thinking, they're going to need breakfast. They're sure not eating anything edible out of that building. I walked up to him and I said, sir, I know you, by the way, he had been a part of the leader of the split. God gives you opportunities to give acts of kindness in return. I walked up to him and I said, sir, I know you've got a lot on your plate right now. I said, but I just want you to know breakfast is ours. The church will serve breakfast in our youth center. He said, thank you, and went back about the stuff he needed to do. There was one thing he didn't need to worry about, was breakfast. I walked over to a lady that was the leader of the opposition to the academy. And I said, hey, I just volunteered to serve breakfast to all the kids. I want you to head to Walmart with me. It's 24-hour open, right? You and I are headed to Walmart, and we're buying enough food for close to 200 people. Okay. And she and I went shopping, and she got on the phone and got a bunch of her friends to meet us at the youth center. And we served breakfast to these kids. They sent them home right after breakfast because the academy had a lot of things to sort out. They just made their October break a little earlier and sent the kids out. And I told the academy, look, we're not going to keep serving your meals, but you've got a staff that can do that, and you can use our youth center. It's got a commercial kitchen in it. It's legal. And they took over. That meant that the academy students were walking back and forth past the church every day, eating 3 meals a day in our facilities, and they're splitting off from the church. But we just sat back. We're as loving as we could be. And I got a phone call from the student chaplain, a young lady. And she said, Pastor Tim, can I come over to your office? Yeah, sure you can. She came over. She said, I need you to pray for me. I said, why? She says, I'm about to get fired. Why are you going to get fired? She says, I just had a meeting with the student pastors of the freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, and the SA religious vice president. They're unanimous. They don't want to separate from the church. She says, I'm about to go into the principal's office and say, I will not do what you told me to do. Because he told her she was leading out in the worship service that she's now saying she's not going to be a part of. We had prayer, and she went to get fired. A few minutes later, she came back to my office smiling. She said, I didn't get fired. He's so busy working on the details of the insurance and everything else. He said, whatever. And that was it. Oh, I let go and God is fixing it. Tells you who's in charge, doesn't it? Yeah. Then on Sabbath, October 20, oh, did we have fun. You see, I talked to her and I said, okay, who did you have preaching if you would have done it, the split? And the SA religious leader was going to be preaching. I know the kid well, the young man. I know how he became a Christian. I said, good. I'm going to talk to him. And I talked to him, and we agreed to do a team sermon, he and I together, to show the unity. And it was so much fun. Here's how I had him share his testimony as a part of the sermon, as the major piece of it. He's sitting in history class with his history book open, but he's got something else hidden in his book. So it looks like he's reading history, but he's actually reading something else in history class. This kind of stuff happens, right? But not very often this way. What he's got hidden in his book is a little booklet called Steps to Christ. And he's reading about surrendering his life to Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. And there's a page in there where you can sign your name and date that you're accepting Jesus as your Lord and Savior. And in the middle of history class, he is giving his life to Jesus. Kind of a fun history class project, right? And so we talked back and forth about these kind of things, and we had a good time. So we've gone a long ways in just over a month. I mean, that fire, everything in there happened in just over a month's time period. And I am coming up and coming up. but God wasn't done with me yet. December came a time of risk and survival. You see, at the time, I was an approved guide in Fitton Cave down along the Buffalo River. Fitton Cave has 18 miles of passages. I've never been lost for more than a couple hours at a time in there, while leading a group, no less, one time. One of the young people, an academy student, was with me. They had what they called senior memories or whatever. His memory, being lost in Fitton Cave with Pastor Tim. He was hoping to get out. But it was around the 20th of December. School was out, and I took my 2 teenage daughters, my 10-year-old son, teenage niece, and her 18-year-old weightlifter boyfriend, myself, and a young couple in their 20s. He's a contractor, she's a nurse. And we went into Fitton Cave on a Sunday morning. You drive down a 4-wheel drive road from Compton down the mountain. You get down to Irby Church. Nearby there's a little parking spot for cavers. And there's a tube there, and you put your names of each person and emergency contact information. And you put your time expected into the cave and your time expected out of the cave. I already have a permit for the day, so they know I'm coming. And you put that in there, and if you don't come out when you're supposed to, they're supposed to send a rescue team after you. It's 2 miles of hiking to the trail and to the cave opening, and you've got to cross a stream 3 times to get there. This particular morning, there were flash flood warnings out. It had been raining all day Saturday and into the night. And so on Sunday morning when we got there, it was just a light drizzle. And I figure if I can get to the cave, I should be able to get back because the water level should be coming down after the storm. We got to the first crossing. And the water was running about this deep instead of ankle deep. More like a small river instead of a creek now. And I have a caving rope for lowering ourselves down into the deeper sections of the cave. I tie the rope around my waist, and I go into the water, and I've got my 20-something-year-old contractor, Troy Norwood, belaying me, which simply means if I lose my footing, the current will swing me back to our shore on the rope. I'm using a branch, and I brace, and I get across. I'd already tied the other end of that rope to a tree up high. I get to the other side, and I cinch it down really tight up high. I now have an Atrolian traverse, which is a single-strand rope bridge, and I send my team across one at a time with a harness. We got all 8 across, and I'm the only one that got really wet. We left our rope there. I decided to give up on the lower section of the cave and leave that as a safety, because I know I only have to cross the stream once. There are 3 crossings, but if I go cross-country without trail, I only have to technically cross once to get back to my car. We went upstream, got into the water there, and I carried several people across, and the weightlifter and Troy carried a couple people across. We got our team across there. 3rd crossing, we do the same thing. We get to the cave, I open the combination, pull the gate open, bars like a prison door. Open it, drop through the hole, pull it shut, and lock it. I leave the combination right by the opening. So if I get hit on the head, anybody can open the cave door from inside. We head in to the cave. And at least I'm away from my church doing something I really love. Outdoors and caving. And we're going down into there. We get to something called the manhole. The manhole is a hole about that big around. Guess how it got the name manhole? You go down the manhole, it drops about 10 to 15 feet, and there's another passage that goes off from there. Now the trick is, the manhole is also a lot like a large toilet bowl, because the flow stone, nice and polished around it, nice and smooth like a toilet bowl around the hole, and you've got to set up a little, I had a webbing ladder with me, that there's this little stalagmite about yay tall, and that big around, it's a nice strong one, and you put the loop over the stalagmite, and then you climb down the ladder of just loops and a piece of webbing. And so to set it, I just kind of slide down this toilet bowl, brace across the other side, and while I'm braced, I put the thing on there. I slipped just as I was putting it on, which means I'm going down. And I lunged, and I got the loop over the stalagmite because I didn't want to take the ladder down with me. I wanted it hanging after I hit the bottom. So there's a way back out. But I'm thinking about the bottom as I'm doing it, because I know that this flow stone goes down, and right in the middle is a stalagmite pointed up. It's about so big around, but it's only about that tall, and it's round on top. It's not a little pointy thing, it's round. But after you fall 10 to 15 feet, to land on that thing is not going to be good. And my goal is to not land in the middle where I know that stalagmite is. It's loose rock around it. River rock kind of stuff. And so I grab for a little chunk of rock on the side that jerks my arm up straight, slams my body in against it, cracking a rib. But I hit the ground beside the stalagmite, not on it. Do you know what you do for a cracked rib? Nothing. You're just going to be sore for a couple of weeks, several weeks. I've done it 2 or 3 times. So I know what's coming, but hey, my group heard the scraping and the thud. They said, "You okay?" Because they couldn't see around the corner. I said, "Yeah, I'm going to be okay." And I got the ladder set, come on down. And so they came down and we kept going. Eventually, we're working our way out. And we get back to this big room it's the entry room. You cannot see the cave entrance. It's up and around a corner, but I see a strobe light flashing from outdoors. And I looked at my clock, and I thought, they shouldn't have a rescue team out here yet. It's not time for us to be out yet. And then I thought, you can't get a rescue vehicle to the opening of this cave. It's an impossibility. What is that flashing light? What I didn't know is for the last 6 hours, and we'd been underground 12 hours. For the last 6 hours, a massive thunderstorm had stalled out over the mountain. And they have now had a torrential downpour on top of flooding that's already there. And they're now having what they would call a 100-year event. When we got to the opening, there's a waterfall coming in through the door. There's not even a creek there. And I made a mistake. I went in and I opened that door to get out of the cave. We should have stayed in the cave, but I didn't want them to have to send a rescue team after me. I didn't want that on my record as a guide. Besides, I left a rope up to get out. I can get out back to my car where I have dry clothes and food for everybody. So we left the cave, and just within feet of the cave, we literally had to make a human chain to get through a stream that shouldn't have been there. And there were cliffs around us, and there was water shooting out of cliffs here and there everywhere. Just wow. In the cave, there's a lower exit with a stream flowing out of it. There was no way that this cave would ever fill with water. It would just flow out. We should have stayed in. But we got down to the trail, and instead of going downstream, I thought, the further we go downstream, the worse it'll get. I want to go upstream. Told everybody to stay there. It was just 100 or 200 yards away to an upstream crossing. I headed upstream by myself because I wanted a chance to think about it without them worried, without them talking to me and scared. And I waded into the water by myself. I'm really cautious about this because I know if I'm by myself, it's bad news. But there was a big eddy right there where the trail hit, so I could walk in the relatively calm water. And right away, I was up to about this deep, and it was not even into the stream yet. And I'm standing in that water looking downstream, and it's the middle of the night, 11, 12 o'clock at night. And I'm looking at this big standing wave and brush just rolling. And I know anybody that tries to cross here, at least some of them will be washed into that brush. And if you get washed into brush in a whitewater flood, your odds of survival are very low. And I thought I could probably get some of my team across, but I would lose some of them. Remember who's on my team? 3 of my own kids. And I thought, nope, not going to do that. From that moment on, every decision I made was based on what was least likely to kill somebody. There were no easy decisions for the rest of the night. Got back to my team. I said, let's go downstream. And we headed down till we got to a crossing, and then there is no way you're making that crossing. But you know how it is. Streams go right into the base of a cliff around here, right? And then turn, go to the other side. That's why you have to cross as you're going through a valley. So we gathered together. We had prayer that I would, as I went up along the end of this cliff face, that I would pick a ledge that would actually go through. We passed a ledge or two, and we got to a ledge, and I said, okay, this one. I just felt like this one might go through. And I'm working across the ledge, and as I look down, there's water coming down, it's pouring rain, and we all have helmet lights, so we can at least see wherever we look. And as I look down, I see the whitewater crashing into the base of the cliff. Anybody that slips is gone. There's nothing we can do for anybody who slips. We got across that ledge, hit the trail where it came out on the next crossing, made it to another one. Second time on a ledge, my 10-year-old son, the temperatures are plummeting. It would be snowing before morning. It's December. And my 10-year-old son kept saying, Daddy, I'm cold. Can I lay down and take a nap? Well, I know what that means. That means hypothermia, and if we take a nap, it's probably the last nap we ever take. It would be fatal. And I said, no, we're going to keep going. But I stopped on a little ledge that I gathered everybody together for a break. And I said, all right, everybody take off your packs. I want you to look through your packs, and if you have any food in there, any calories, I want you to eat it now. I want you to look through your pack and find anything that you don't need for survival, anything that you had only for the cave, knee pads, stuff like that, leave them right here. I don't want you wasting energy carrying something, and I don't care about litter tonight. Just leave anything you don't need right here on this ledge. Okay. I watched the husband and wife dig through, and they found an apple core from their meal earlier in the night. He ate half of that brown apple core, she ate the other half. And I said, it's time to go. And my son said, oh, but Daddy, he had been laying down. He said, I just want to take a nap. And I had to tell him. I said, Michael, if we take a nap, we will die. We have to keep moving. Oh, and the 10-year-old never cried again that night. We kept going. Somebody said, hey, I've got to go to the bathroom. I said, just urine? Yeah. I said, would it be warm or cold? What? I said, can you get any wetter than you are? No. Would it be warm or cold? Got it. Nobody stopped to go to the bathroom. We all felt a little bit of warmth once in a while, though. How bad is it when you're doing that? We got to my rope, at least where we thought we'd get to it. But the water is now running so high, the rope we left 8 feet above the water was submerged. We couldn't see it, but we knew what trees it was tied to. But it was gone. We got down to an area right across from our car. On a good day, you could see it in the daytime. I gathered my team together. There was one poncho that hadn't been shredded by greenbriers. My jacket was in tatters. You know what a greenbrier patch is like, right? I would just take my jacket and my arms and lunge backwards through to break a hole for my team. It was an interesting night. And so we had one poncho that was left intact, and I put him under that, and I stood outside with my light flashing back and forth on a tree. Why? Any self-respecting rescue team will come to a giant flashing oak tree out in the mountains. And if you want to say, why not use your cell phone? If you've been down there to this day, there's no cell phone reception in those spots. And my problem was I should be able to see the lights of a rescue team from where they'd be starting from, and there was nothing. I was to find out the next day they thought the weather was so bad that nobody would have gone caving. There would be no rescue team. They were busy rescuing people all over the place that were getting washed off of roads in their cars along the Buffalo River. And so, after waiting a while and no rescue team, I told my team, you know, about 13 years ago, I went up a fire trail on the side we were on. I said, there was an old cabin up there. What I didn't tell them, it was a collapsed old cabin. But my hope is that I can find some shelter in part of that old cabin. And I said, let's get going. Are you in with me? Because I've got to keep my group together. And I put the 20-something-year-old contractor in the lead. I said, you lead it, I'm going to pull up the rear. I had 2 reasons for that. One is I'm pretty good at motivating people that don't want to move. I've been teaching rock climbing and caving for years and a backpacker and whitewater trips and all that. I've had experience. And the other is because I'd been in and out of water so many times looking for crossings and carrying people across, that from the waist down, I was turning numb. Cold water. And I was afraid my legs were about to stop working. But I figured I could crawl if I couldn't walk. But to make that work, I had to be in the back where they wouldn't stop. So I sent them ahead, but my 10-year-old wouldn't leave my side. And he kept me going. You see, I know that if you make a decision, that you can keep doing things. There have been people who've crawled for miles after they couldn't walk. And I'd already decided I was going to make it to the cabin. I just didn't know how. And as we're going along, occasionally we saw a light in the distance. It was a light on another mountain far ahead, but every time you saw a light, it was encouraging. Maybe it's a search team. Give you a little burst. But then I came across the jacket laying on the ground. Well, first a backpack. And I knew it was the weightlifter's backpack. You see, he's a high protein intake guy as a bodybuilder. If you have a high protein diet, you have a shorter endurance. Bigger burst of strength, shorter endurance. Marathoners are a higher carbohydrate diet, and most of us were vegetarian, and he was the other, extreme other. And he's the first one that starts going out on us. And a little bit later, I found his coat. And I know if he is thinking he's warm in this condition, he's already going into hypothermia. I caught up to him, and my niece, his girlfriend, was slapping him across the face to keep him awake while standing, because he's starting to fade in and out of consciousness. A little bit later, there's a yell up ahead, "I've found an outhouse!" It was a fiberglass outhouse, a handicap-sized one. You can jam 8 people into that. Body to body, that is warmth. How many of you have ever slept in an outhouse before because of bad weather? I have previously before. It's not the first time. You do enough outdoor stuff, you get into bad things once in a while. All right? So yeah, I've done it. And I had no qualms with doing it again. I said, but there didn't used to be anything like an outhouse up here. Keep looking, and it's now starting to snow. It's probably 2 or 3 in the morning. And the contractor goes up around a little bend in the trail and yells, "I found the cabin." I'm thinking, oh, wonder how bad it is. As I come around the corner, my headlight illumines it. It's been totally restored as a historic cabin in the Buffalo River National Park. It's got a sign on the side of it, $5,000 fine, 6 months in prison for breaking and entering. And my daughter, which was ahead of me, is already standing there with her light reading the sign. As I walk up, she looks at me, she said, "Dad, it's warm and they have food in jail." I said, "Yeah, I'm thinking the same thing." And I walked around to find the least destructive way of getting in. Contractor and I walking around. There's actually a little screened-in porch that my team's on now. It had a door that was open, but the wind and rain are blowing through the porch. It was nasty. We went around, and they had this old antique rippled glass windows. I love old glass. No, I'm going to have to take one out. They have wire over it with wooden strips holding the wire on. It's Arkansas. You can find a tool called a rock. We took a big old rock, beat the wood to pieces, ripped the wire off over the glass, and then my contractor friend broke a hole through the window with a rock. I reached in, opened the window, he broke, I entered. We shared in it together. I went through the house, opened the door from inside, and let my team in. It was still cold inside, but there was no wind and there was no rain. We're soaked. There's a little closet in the corner with a padlock on it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a little Leatherman multi-purpose tool, tossed it to the contractor, and I said, "Find out what's behind that locked door." And I started checking some other things. There is a wood stove in there. 2 legs, no stovepipe. Yeah, that old broken wood stove's worthless. There's a metal desk. I opened a drawer. There's a couple pieces of paper, how to run a cave rescue for Fit and Cave. Okay, don't need that. There's another little door that's not locked. I opened it. It's a stairway into the cellar. The water is filling the cellar. There are rats on the stairway. I shut the door. The rats get the lower level, we get the main level. And I started stripping what's left of the clothes off of the weightlifter because he's going unconscious on me. I've got to figure out something. I got to get these wet clothes off and find something to get him warmed up. And about then, the contractor says, "Got it, I'm in." Open the door. There are spools of wire, stacks of it. Communication cables for a cave rescue in Fitton Cave. We have circled around and we're right over the opening. Just a few hundred yards away from the house is the cave opening we'd come out of earlier. I knew that, but it's their headquarters building for a cave rescue now. Okay? But get this. There were 3 sleeping bags. There's a can of corn, a can of beans, there's a Coleman lantern, there is a little single burner Coleman stove, a gallon of Coleman fuel, 3 lighters. Thank you, Lord. If I'd had a written wish list, this would have been it. And we open up those cans of corn. There was a spoon in there too. And we heated that up over the little burner. And I put the weightlifter and my 10-year-old, stripped them both to their underwear shorts, put them in body to body in one sleeping bag. They're in the worst shape. And then I spooned food into their mouths as they're conscious. Okay, wake up. Okay, another. They got about half the food, then the rest of us shared the other part. So we each had a few warm bites of food for calories. Then I took the 3 teenage girls. Typically, when you've got a mixed group of teenagers, you say, guys over here, girls over here. Not tonight. Girls, I want you as tight as you can up against the boys. I mean, body-to-body contact, up against. So one of the girls went up against their sleeping bag, another against her, and another against her, and I put the second sleeping bag, unzipped it like a blanket, and laid it over them. They're laying on the floor. The floor is cold, but at least it's keeping heat from going up. I laid down against one of my daughters as tight as I could. Tanya, the nurse, comes in behind me as tight as she can. Her husband, Troy, is on the outside edge. He's got more body fat than anybody else. He's got the outside edge. I'm not kidding. That's how you make those decisions. And we covered over with the third one, and we laid there and violently shook. I mean, it was bad. And I'm thinking, oh, did I ever make a mistake? I'm laying on my cracked rib. But I will not roll over and go face to face with Tanya. And we just laid there and shook. In the morning, as light started coming in the windows, I went outside. And I'm hoping and praying to hear the sound of an airplane or a helicopter. What I didn't know is they didn't know we were missing until about 8:30 in the morning, when my wife was able to get a call through the park headquarters when they began answering their phone that we had not come home. And only then did they realize they had 8 people missing in a flood. Well, we didn't know that, and I didn't get any answers, any sound, so I came in to warm up by a lantern. Just, you know. And Troy and Tanya, the 20-something couple, said, Pastor Tim, I'm not sure there's a rescue coming. We want to try and make it to the lights that we saw last night. I said, it's not wise to split. They said, yeah, but there's no rescue. We can do it. I said, the rest of the team can't move. They're shot. They said, we can. I said, okay, here's the deal. You have to follow exactly the route that we agree on. If we're rescued, we can tell them where to find you. And so we picked a route and everything, and they took off. A few hours later, my daughter was looking out the window. It's raining. And she said, I see something white moving out there. By the way, the two boys haven't moved out of their sleeping bag. They're still stuffed together in their sleeping bag. But my daughter's looking out her window, and she says, oh, it's just another waterfall. A little bit later, I hear this sound. And it's just as nonchalant and factual, just, if it's a waterfall, it has a national park emblem on the side of it. That brought me to the window quickly. And in comes a four-wheel drive, really high-raised four-wheel drive pickup with a crew cab on it. White, National Park pickup. He's picking his way over logs and stuff on the fire trail. And he's coming around into the little yard of the cabin. I step out of this cabin to meet a man in uniform, and I know I'm coming out of a cabin that says $5,000 fine, 6 months in prison. I can just tell you, that was one of the sweetest sights I've seen, was that man in uniform getting out of his truck. But you have to know something. He was wearing a life jacket as he got out of his truck. When's the last time you put a life jacket on to drive a truck? He'd been through a lot already that day. He'd been given the assignment of trying to get to the cabin to see if we got there. They sent their other search teams in different directions. And I came out of there and said, sir, I sure am happy to see you, but I'm sorry we had to break into your cabin. He said, don't worry, I've just been hoping and praying you were going to be here. I said, sir, we had to break into the closet, and those sleeping bags are a mess. Remember, nobody stopped to go to the bathroom. They weren't nice. And I said, we'll be glad to take them home, clean them, and bring them back. He said, don't worry about that. I have a commercial washer and dryer at my house. And it dawned on me, when Jesus comes back, I'm guilty of sin on my own record. And I'm going to say, but Jesus, I'm just a sinner. But Jesus is going to say, I've already taken care of that. And he said, you're all here, right? And I said, no. I said, pull out your map. I'm going to show you what happened. And he laid it on his hood, and I showed him, and he called in for a search team to go in from an upper level to find them. And then he comes back into the cabin, and he sees the two boys, especially the weightlifter, is just not doing well. Was that ever embarrassing to him? But anyway, he goes back to his truck, grabs a pair of wind pants and a wind jacket, light nylon, and he comes in, and he gives them to the weightlifter, and he said, here, young man, put these on. My truck's warm, and there's Cliff Bars in the truck. Weightlifter here is warm and food. He jumps out, grabs the wind pants and the wind jacket, and they're like flags flying behind him as he streaks for the truck. He doesn't put them on until after he's in the warm truck. You should have seen one of my daughters a little bit before that. When the truck is coming around, she'd run out onto the porch to make sure her sister was really telling the truth. She ditched her blue jeans. She's wearing a sweatshirt upside down. She's got her legs through the armholes because it was a little drier and warmer. Blue jeans, by the way, cotton kills. You do not want to wear blue jeans in cold, wet weather. It can be fatal. I wear fast dry clothing out there, which left me in a little better shape than some of the others. But she gets out there and sees it really is a ranger, and she goes, yeah! So we did have something to smile about. And the ranger puts us in his truck, and he heads down the mountain. He says, I was finding the backpack and then the jacket, and he says, I knew you were in trouble. Yeah. I knew how bad a trouble when I saw the jacket, but I was so weak and so worn out, I didn't pick the jacket up, knowing what it meant, because I didn't have it in me to carry somebody else's equipment. But we were alive in the truck, and it was warm. We headed down the mountain. We got to a stream crossing. He said, everybody out of the cab in the back, put the life jacket on the little guy. He had one life jacket. He said, on my way in, the current caught the hold of the truck. He was crossing way too deep on a crossing. He said, the current swung the back end of my truck downstream. He said, I hit the gas and I prayed. That ranger nearly gave his life for mine. Now, he's inside the truck with no life jacket, and we're outside with the one and only life jacket. We cross a very dangerous crossing. We get to the far side, we get to our car. We change clothing, we get a little bit of food, we get back in his truck, because the four-wheel drive road we'd brought that car down, it's not a four-wheel drive vehicle, has now washed out. And we're going to have to leave downstream, and it was going to be 5 days before the water was low enough to leave. And he said, okay, everybody back in, and we went up that four-wheel drive trail. They up on top, we were reunited with Troy and Tanya. Troy and Tanya had been working their way up the direction I'd told them to go, and they got tired. They sat down on a log to rest and to pray. When they finished praying, they opened their eyes, and from a seated position, they could see a cabin that they couldn't see when they were standing. Good thing they sat down to rest and pray. They headed for the cabin. They knocked on the door, and they hear a voice from inside saying, come in. They open the door and gingerly step into somebody's house that just yelled, come in. And he's upstairs, and he's got an opening down. He looks down. Oh, you must be Troy and Tanya. They knew instantly we'd been rescued. He'd gotten a call from the Park Service. The police get to his cabin and open the gate up into his property so they could drive through his place and get closer to where they thought they'd meet Troy and Tanya. And so he'd got there. He beat the National Forest to his cabin. He opened it up. He'd been at work nearby somewhere. And he got there, and a wet couple shows up, so it must be Troy and Tanya that the Park Service is looking for. And a few minutes later, rangers show up at his house to let him know that they're there and not to lock the gate while they're back there. And he said, well, here's Troy and Tanya. So we were reunited. It took us 7 hours. It took me 7 hours from rescue before I stopped shaking. I wished I knew what my body core temperature was that day. But we were supposed to go on vacation down to Louisiana, but we couldn't go because our car was stranded down there. And the ranger, Bill Strobel, said, I'll call you when you can get your car out. We got a call, and Troy and I headed over. We went upstream and found our rope. It was still tied between the trees. It's a filthy, dirty caving rope. I have never seen it so clean in my life. It had been washed by the floodwaters. Probably the cleanest since it was brand new. We coiled it up, went back, got in the car, drove it out. But while we were waiting for that, I went shopping with my daughters and my wife. The least favorite activity that I can think of in my life is to go clothes shopping with my wife and my daughters. I hate it. What do I look like? Well, you better be really careful answering that question. And I'm colorblind. I don't know what goes with what. I just, Karen, you take the girls shopping. I don't want to go. But this night, I'm with them. JCPenney. I'm watching them trying on clothes. And I found myself sitting in a chair in JCPenney's, grinning ear to ear, because I'm watching my living daughters trying on clothes. Amen. And I knew the depression was gone. From early September to around 20-something of December, it had been but God pulled me, my church, and a school all back together in that time period. I don't know what's bothering you. It might be relationship fears. It might be financial fears. It might be health issues. It might be work fears. It might be what's going to happen at the end of time fears. If you're living in fear, I have a question. What are you trying to do that only God can do? When I realized that, I go, what was I thinking? That I could figure it out or I could do it on my own? What was I thinking? I don't care what the fear is. Some of you are learning new Bible truths. You might be fearful about what happens if you put them into practice. That's not your problem, that's God's. What are you trying to figure out that only God can figure out? Just do what He asks you to do. It's His problem, not yours. How many of you would like to raise your hand and say today, hey, I want to commit to letting God be in charge and I'll just do whatever He asked? Anybody want to raise your hand in that? Yeah. And if you start feeling fear, start asking, what are you trying to do that only God can do? You notice I'm not as opposed to going to a counselor. I did. But I hope it's a biblical counselor that could ask you a question like mine asked me. Because that's where the answer was. That's where the answer was. Okay. What's our closing hymn, since I never got a bulletin? 524. All right. So kids, did I give you a story? Yeah. Got a thumbs up here. All right. 524. Let's join together and sing that.